righty, we are live, so I'm going to go ahead and get started in here and introduce myself in just a second here. So who I am, make sure you can see this. I might need to move the box for a little bit. My name is Mike Dawson. I'm going to be your host tonight, but I'm also the chapter coordinator at the St. Louis Zoo. And also with us tonight is Trincy Beasley. She is our spring peeper assistant, so she's helping with an amphibian conservation project that we're running out of the zoo, and we'll get into a bit later, but all the volunteer hours and observations that people have helped with are actually helping our project to find out where some different species are. If you have any questions after tonight or any other questions about FrogWatch, feel free to reach out. I'll give my contact at the end, but I'm always more than happy to talk to anybody about our program here. So let's jump right in and get started. So to start with, let us know if you recognize this particular sound or you've heard anything similar to it. And I have a poll here in a second. I'm going to try it. So we're going to give it a try to start off tonight. See if everybody can at least hear all this, hopefully. I'll let it play for a second here. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can launch a poll here, and you guys can let me know. Number one, we'll see if the poll works here. If you can respond to the poll, let us know if you've ever heard something like that before. Excellent. Looks like our poll is working good. Okay. Looks like some people definitely have heard that particular sound before, which is fantastic. It's something I'm spending a little bit of time actually looking for. It does sound pretty similar to all kinds of things. Almost sounds like a little duck at nighttime. And we're going to learn quite a few different frog calls tonight, at least the common ones. This one actually is a little uncommon. So what you were hearing is there's a couple different frog species, but the louder one that sounded like kind of like is a wood frog, which is calling, which you can find as you get farther out from the metro area. So some of the people from other outside of that metro, you may have actually heard the wood frog. Kind of cool frog species to hear. They're one of the smallest large frog, if you want to call it that. So they're related to your bullfrogs and leopard frogs and green frogs, except they're just a lot smaller, but they're really early breeders, and their time to breed is really quick, and it already has happened, believe it or not. So they're an interesting species. So a lot of times you do hear things, and sometimes they're frogs, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're birds, sometimes they're insects, but a lot of these frog species sound pretty similar. And so what I wanted to start with is what's going on tonight. So why are we even offering FrogWatch and other amphibian conservation? So I wanted to get into some background just to let everybody know what's going on. So amphibian decline, at least frogs and toads and salamanders and other types of amphibians, have a worldwide decline, which is unfortunate. And there's lots of reasons. Now, in our particular area, you'll notice in the map, obviously Central and South America and Asia have some of the highest declines in the world, and they're still ongoing. In our area, in the Midwest, we don't have a massive decline. We have a steady decline, which is, is good for our species. But there's still areas and certain types of species in our area that are becoming rare. And that's one of the reasons why we're interested in FrogWatch, to see if we can stop some of the local decline, at least in our backyard. So to kind of give you an idea of what's going on, this is just a particular map. Believe it or not, this is pulled from some of the projects that we run out of FrogWatch, and we'll talk about them tonight, but this is just some of the data. And if you look at all the little green dots in here, this is represented by a lot of different frog species. So we do have a lot of frog species still, inside the city, outside the city, all over the place. But what you want to notice, and this is something we've started to notice by looking at our data, if you start to look at certain species, sometimes you get a map that looks like this. So these are some of our smaller early spring breeding species. And so this is a spring peeper. We'll learn it's called tonight, as well as a cricket frog and the chorus frog. But you notice there are little sparser observations. There are probably some more, out in these other lining regions outside of that pink line, which is Interstate 270. But you notice there's not that many inside. And so we are seeing that certain species may or may not really be thriving inside those areas. And so a couple of projects we're working on And number one, I'll talk about it tonight, is to try to help collect data to say either we're wrong or they definitely are not there. And hopefully that'll help us, then we can start figuring out why. And so good question to start with then after that is, why are amphibians being affected? So if they have a decline, what's going on? Well, one of the biggest things about amphibians that has to do with the type of animal that they are is that almost their entire life cycle, and not just the adults or babies and everything, but almost their entire life cycle revolves around water because they are amphibians. And so they start out obviously in water and an egg. That's where their eggs are laid. They hatch as a tadpole. Their tadpole stage is in water. And most amphibians, at least most frogs and toads, at least in our area, are going to go in and out of water quite a bit. There are exceptions. Tree frogs obviously go up in the trees, and sometimes they can be less affected by some of the pollution and other things. But they're pretty sensitive to changes in the environment. And that could be pollution. It could be changes to water levels, water pH, things that get into the water. Too much sunlight. So a lot of different habitats could be affected quite easily. And sometimes it could just be fish added to a habitat. Some of them can't handle fish predation, some can. But they're very insensitive to changes in their environment. And so if you were to look at what's happened to a lot of our watersheds over time, and these are just a snapshot, the different colors of some of the major watersheds that make up the St. Louis region. And we have a very unique history of watersheds here. And if you read about them or live in any particular one that's highlighted on the map, all of them have a neat history. As St. Louis was grown since it was founded, a lot of them have changed. A lot of the rivers and creeks have been channelized for help with flooding and other things. Some of them have had all kinds of stuff put into them. Some of them back in the 1800s were used as sewers. And so a lot of our watersheds have been changed and altered over time. Some of them don't actually really exist much more. It has changed the landscape for a lot of our frogs and toads. A lot of our interstates too has actually divided some of those up. And as you saw in some of those maps where you don't see certain species on one side of the interstate and the other. So that's one of the things that's happened to our watersheds. And obviously we're trying to collect enough data. So one, we can see where these frog species are and hopefully figure out different ways to maybe with green corridors and making things more frog friendly, get them back into some of those parks that are inside that 270 belt. And these are just good examples. Retention ponds, although they're good for different purposes, sometimes a lot of stuff can get into them, whether it be trash from runoff and storm drains. But a lot of our rivers and creeks have been straight and look something like the ones on the left or the top. And there also, there's a lot of them sometimes have fish put into them, and that can cause problems for certain types of species. But there are a lot of good benefits for having frogs around. And one of them, obviously, if you look on the right, they eat a lot of insects. They're fantastic to have around. And if you think of all the different kinds, large ones eat large insects and a lot of the smaller ones eat, really small different types of insects. So having a diversity is a great thing for our food chain and food web around here. And if you've grown up here, you probably know sometimes different areas of the cities, they might spray for control of mosquitoes. And obviously now we probably need to do that in some places. There's just not enough frog species to be able to eat enough of those to get those mosquito populations down. But there's also many other reasons besides the food chain. Worldwide, there's a lot of studies going on studying some of the secretions, the slime and the chemicals in these animals, because a lot of them have evolved to help protect against fungus infections and bacteria infections. But when isolated in small amounts can actually be used in medicine. And so that there are very, really unique animals out there for all of us to study for a lot of different purposes. One that might seem really weird, but I always find it fascinating, is a lot of these animals have the ability to actually get really cold. Some of them can freeze solid. And so studying these animals and how their bodies are able to be frozen solid may help humans again someday to be able to freeze organs and things like that. So they can be pretty useful for studying purposes. What I wanted to jump into next is a little bit about frog and toad basics. And why I'm going through this too, Trincy, if you happen to see anything in a question or answer or chat or something like that, that might be tied to something I'm talking about, feel free to jump on in there and we'll answer it live if we can. If not, we'll try to answer everything at the end. So real quick, just so everybody has that nice background base. So frogs and toads, they are vertebrates. So a lot of times they're pretty squishy, don't always look like it, but they are animals with bones in their bodies. So they would fit, with the groups of fish and reptiles and mammals and birds. So that they do belong to that group of vertebrates. And when you break that down, amphibians can break down into frogs and toads, which is what we'll be talking about tonight. And then salamanders, which are also really cool. We have quite a few salamanders here in the St. Louis region. And caecilians. We don't have caecilians here in St. Louis, or even for the most part in the United States. You can find them down near Mexico, but they are an entire group of amphibians that do exist. They look kind of like a worm on the outside, but they have a skeleton on the inside and teeth, so they're definitely not a worm. They're pretty neat if you ever get a chance to research them or read about them. They're pretty fascinating. Typically found in the tropical region. And there's not a lot known about most species. A lot of them are pretty, colorful. They live under the leaf litter, are shallow down in the dirt, and they eat a lot of insects and vertebrates and things like that. But pretty cool animal. So some of the basics of frogs and toads, of course, they have that skeleton, which you can see up in here, but they definitely have ears, but a little bit different than yours. And so if you zoom in this picture, actually, this was an animal I worked with a long time ago named Ross, the bullfrog. But one of the cool things that circle, this was a male, and they have huge, what's called a tympanum. It's kind of like having an eardrum on the surface. The other one that's really cool, if you can see this eyeball just kind of sitting on top of his head, one of the most fascinating things I think about frogs and toads is they have an ability that we don't have. But when we close our eye, the eye just stays placed. The eyelid just closes. If you were to take your finger when he was alive and you were to touch his eyeball would go whoop and go down in his skull. So if you look over here, there's actually a cavity that this eyeball can go down into. And so his eye almost is like flat with the skull, on the top of the skull. His eyeball can sink down with using muscles to pull it in. And what's neat about that is it's right over the roof of his mouth. So if he does it really fast, the roof of his mouth pushes down. And a lot of frogs and toads use that ability sometimes to help swallow food they're having trouble swallowing. They have a huge mouth, but sometimes they need a little extra help, and they'll actually blink their eyes and kind of jam the food, hit it, and push it down their throat. The other thing that I wanted to point out, of course, they have skin like this, and we'll look at other pictures of skin, but typically it's a slimy skin, a glandular skin. Lots of stuff comes out. Some of it's a lubricant to keep them wet, and sometimes they have chemicals in them. And I like to say that all frogs are poisonous, but to a certain degree. So all the frogs I've caught in the St. Louis area, you're not going to hurt your hands. It's still a good idea, of course, to wash your hands before you eat. If you go to different places in the world, obviously there's many frog species that have even more chemicals in their skin that can make you sick. But the purpose of most of them is just to taste nasty, so animals spit them out. If you were to have a dog, like try to eat a toad, my dog, when I grew up, ate a toad, and my dog threw up pretty fast. You would hope that my dog wouldn't eat another toad. I think my dog tried to eat 3 more toads. Didn't quite learn fast enough. The other neat thing about a lot of frogs and toads, and this one down the bottom is a tree frog hand, but you notice this one has little suction cups on the end here, or little toe pads. And there's all different types of feet, but it depends if they're more aquatic or versus arboreal, climbing up and down a tree or something like that. But they do have really unique feet. The other neat one is, at least in our area, there's always exceptions in different places in the world, but in our area, all of our frogs and toads lay their egg masses in water. And so that's one of the nice things about the breeding time we're going to talk about it. They're always going to go to a water source where we live. And so it does make it easier sometimes to find them. And of course, they go through all our frog species here in the St. Louis region or Missouri, or at least the United States, all go through metamorphosis, which means they're all going to start out as a fertilized egg. The eggs hatch. You're going to have a tadpole larval stage. Sometimes people call them polywogs and things like that, but it doesn't matter if you're a toad or a bullfrog or a cricket frog, which is what this is. They're all going to have this toad or larval stage, and all. I can't always tell them apart, but all tadpoles all look different depending on your species. And sometimes it takes a little longer to start seeing the characteristics. For example, this little guy, this is actually a bullfrog tadpole. If you were to actually see the cricket frog tadpole, he's kind of cool. Mostly black in shape, a light brown with a black tip on his tail. So all of them do have some differences about them. There are some that are really hard to tell apart, but they all go through that life cycle. Some of that life cycle, which might blow your mind, sometimes takes longer than you would think. Some of our frogs and toads, they lay an egg, and let's just say now, the egg's going to hatch depending on the species, and it might be done by April. It's already a small looking adult, and it's out in the water and gone. Some of our frogs in here, like bullfrogs and green frogs, the tadpole may stay in a pond for 2 years before it finally grows the legs and all the rest of it, loses its tail and everything else and finishes metamorphosizing. So they're not all exactly the same. They still go through the same process, but some might take longer than others. Another good characteristic, of course, is what's called amplexus, and this is just how they mate. And so one of the things that's true about most, but not every single one, but if you notice here, I have the arrow point, this is the male. Most males happen to be smaller than the female, which is why I don't point this out. These are, of course, toads, but this is something you may see in the breeding season. And so as they go near water or something like that, you may see a bunch of toads either on top of each other. But this is called amplexus, and the reason for this is so the male can fertilize eggs when they're laid. And then a lot of people do ask, and it's a great question, like, what's the difference between a frog and a toad? And so I've taken some up close pictures, but it should give you some pretty good idea. Kind of looks like if you were to touch this one on the left, it's kind of slimy. And it's true. Most frogs typically have slimier skin, thinner skin as well. Whereas toads have a little bit thicker. They have bumpy, and sometimes people call it warty skin because of the bumps. And they are not warts like you have on a person. They're just thick bumps. These big ones up here, and I'll point it out too, I think in another picture, but these are called parotid glands. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the toad skin is thicker. And if you have thicker skin, it means you don't dry out as fast. And so you can go farther away from water, which is why we do find toads a lot of times farther away from water. And now one of the drawbacks is if you have thinner skin, most frogs can actually breathe through their skin to some amount. Some can breathe a lot through their skin, which means air can pass through that skin. So besides breathing with lungs and their nose and everything, they can breathe, through their skin. Oxygen can pass through it, which is amazing adaptation. Another huge difference I wanted to point out between a frog and a toad on the left over here, these are frog eggs. Look like kind of maybe, I don't know what you think, grapes maybe, something like that. And then over here on the right, these are toad eggs. So this might hopefully give you a good idea what toad eggs might look like, but they're like strings, and these are the little black dots will eventually develop into a little larva or tadpole. And then if you take a look here on the left, this is a bullfrog skull, and on the right, this is a toad skull. And you may not be able to see from where you're sitting here, but I'll just run my mouse, hope you can see the mouse. Along the ridge of the bullfrog over here, these are teeth. Not exactly like yours, but it's almost like if you just have ridges, sharp ridges that grow out of the roof of your mouth. That's kind of like what a bullfrog is. Nothing on the bottoms, just top teeth. Toads have zero, no top or bottom teeth. And so there is a big difference, obviously, in the way they eat and everything like that. Toads typically have to, that's why they use their tongue and they get a little closer to be able to grab it and swallow it. Bullfrogs can grab and hold on, and that's what those teeth help them do. So if you ever wanted to know, does it hurt to get bit? Well, it always depends on the size of the animal. Toads obviously don't hurt at all, but if a bullfrog were to bite you, if you don't yank your hand out of his mouth, although I've never been bit by a bullfrog, it wouldn't hurt. Now, if you yank your finger out, and you possibly might cut your skin around those sharp teeth, but they can't really push down. They don't have a lot of power to push down just to have a big mouth. And here's a picture of the parotid glands on that toad. So we'll zoom in. And what these are is, instead of having all your toxins or poisons coming out anywhere on your body, these guys typically have most of it come out in these two big glands on the back of their body, right here behind their eyes. And the good reason was, if you think of the shape of a toad, you think of a carnivore like a fox or a dog or something biting them, their mouth is probably going to touch right here, really, probably first. And what happens is, you can't see it, but there's little tiny like pinholes, and it looks like white tree sap coming out when they get really scared. And it's pretty, I would say, pretty toxic. It's not going to probably kill anybody, but now there are some toads that would kill you, but ours just, it burns your mouth. It's pretty nasty. And hopefully the reaction is fast enough the animal spits them out. Now, with that being said, of course, there's always a predator that can eat toads without any issues. There's a lot of birds that can eat them. And there's raccoons and a lot of things have figured out how to eat toads, and they just don't eat they eat them from the bottom. So a lot of times you find a dead toad and you turn them over and there's no more meat. And so they learn not to touch the top of their body. So there's lots of animals that have figured out strategies around some of their defenses. Now, since we're going to be talking about frogs and toads and hopefully sound calls in a minute, I wanted to kind of quickly introduce you to what we're hearing. And so what you're hearing in a minute when I start playing some calls is the advertisement or breeding call. And there are many other noises they make, but all the ones I'm going to show you tonight are basically trying to get a boy trying to get a girlfriend. And so the males will come out and they're going to make a lot of noise. Every species makes a little bit different, but the females come out and they pick which ones I guess they think sound the best, and that might indicate that they're a healthy male. But it is important to know that they do make many other noises. Sometimes they make what's called an agnostic or an aggressive call. If you ever corner a bullfrog, they might go ah, and make weird noise, and sometimes it startles animals and they back away. If you ever picked up a frog and they'll make noise, it might be a release call and says, "Let me go." So they make all kinds of them, and you probably have heard this one when you walk up to a pond, you hear and then a bunch of them jump into the water. It's called an alarm call, and a matter of fact, sometimes almost universal. A lot of species, no matter which one, they hear that and they all just jump in the water, no matter who made it, which is kind of cool. And a rain call sounds like a breeding call. It's just a quiet one, and you'll hear it in the fall time when they're not breeding. You might hear them make the same breeding call. But those are just some of the other noises you may hear, and I still hear noises that I've never heard before. Some of the other calls that they make, and there's one that I'll put it out there because you might hear it one day. If you ever hear this one, kind of like a little barking noise, it's a tree frog, basically agnostic call. It's the two tree frogs that are fighting over a branch is what it is. So kind of neat. They make a lot of neat noises. Now, since they make noises, of course, they have to have that, mechanism to hear it. And this is a great example. So this is a bullfrog that I caught. And this is a tympanum. You can see the huge circle right here. And obviously it vibrates when sound waves hit it. And that's how they hear each other. Now, since they're making noises, they do have different vocal sacs, and there's a couple different kinds. And so the one that we're probably most familiar with is, I'll start on the right. This is the single external. This is like just a pouch under the throat. So this will be a tree frog. He's going making little noises like that. The guy in the middle has two pairs. You can't see it, but he has a big bag right here, and on the other side of his body is another one. And so sometimes when you hear frogs go back and forth, one pouch inflates, the other one deflates, and they kind of go back and forth and make noises. And then you have like a bullfrog. This guy's all puffed up, but it kind of looks like an animal that ate a balloon. But when they full of air, their whole body puffs up and their chest puffs up. But it's basically more embedded deeper in their body, and it allows them, especially these bigger frogs, to make that big, deep noise. And we're going to hear that in just a little bit. So when to listen for frogs and toads? Most of us probably know, evening time and nighttime. That is the best time. It does not mean that's when they're only time they do call. And tonight we'll show you different ways you can record frog calls. But a lot of times, if it's going to rain outside, they might start calling, or if it's raining outside, they might start calling. But typically, when they're the loudest, is typically in the springtime, and it depends on species. Starting about now, evening time, you'll start to notice they get a little bit louder, and they typically call a little bit past midnight. Between 1 and 2, they start to slow down. But that's typically when they're going to make most noise. If you wanted to hear them the loudest once the breeding season starts, typically a lot of our species, about 9 o'clock at night, they seem to be the loudest. So let's go ahead and we're going to jump into some frog and toad calls. And while I'm here, Tracy, is there any questions that are out there before I jump into the common frogs and toads?
Hey, Mike. Actually, there's a technical question about the Zoom video. It looks like there's a gray box at the top of the screen.
Okay. Let me see if I can. Is this better now?
No. So if you, there we go. Yep, it's gone now. So that was it. And then one other person asked if you would be sending this video out.
I'm glad you asked that. Yes. And so when we are done tonight, the recording will be saved, cleaned up, and we are going to repost it on our FrogWatch website. And I will show you where you can find our FrogWatch website. So yes, it will be posted. And we will send out an email through our Facebook that has been posted as well. So great.
Hey, Mike.
Yep.
It looks like that rectangle is actually at the bottom of the screen. If you do Control-Alt-Shift-H, it looks like that should hide it.
Okay, Control-Alt-Shift-H. Aha. Is that better? Let's see.
Now it is in the middle of the screen.
Really?
Oh, now I don't see it. Does anybody else see it? Okay, it looks like people are saying it's gone now.
Okay, thank you. Good. All righty, I am going to start in to talk about toads here. So one of the first ones we wanted to go over is the American toad. And so this guy is one of my favorites. I've always liked toads. I think they're pretty cool. And I grew up in Florida. There are lots of toads there. But if you take a look over here, and most of these slides will have what the breeding call is. And so this is typically, they haven't started yet. So typically when we get into March and April, we're going to start seeing these guys up until May. So most of them on our area that I actually see don't really call really much until April, but somewhere in May, they'll start calling. Their call is very distinctive. Sometimes it sounds a little bit like a cricket, but I'm going to go ahead and play it here. And it's a little quiet of a call here. And sometimes they can be a lot louder. But if you listen long enough, you'll hear it might take a breath here. It'll have a gap, and then he's going to start again. There it is. And so that's something I actually listen for when I hear a toad. A lot of times they get lost in the background of other things calling, but I'm listening for that break. And the reason why there's a break, the guy's got to take a breath. So they usually start out with that nice soft trill, and sometimes they can waver a little bit, but a lot of times you listen, you'll hear a break when they're taking a breath and they start again. But our American toad is pretty common here. You're going to start seeing them pretty soon, or at least hearing them pretty soon. Now, these next couple I'm going to go through, these are some of our smaller ones that you may or may not hear depending where you're going to. And we can always tell you places you can go to listen to them. So this one is the spring peeper I'll start with, which is one of the first ones that comes out. Sounds kind of like a bunch of birds calling. These are just a bunch of peepers calling back and forth to each other. And these typically do come out in February, and they start on and off as the weather gets cold. Like right now, we might have some snow coming in. These guys, I'll go ahead and stop there for a second here. These guys will start coming out and calling, then they'll stop, they'll start again, and eventually they get a chorus. A chorus actually from these guys sounds a little more like jingle bells. Just if you can imagine that, and then times that time is like a couple hundred of them. It almost just sounds like a solid noise that hurts your ears. It is true, by the way, if you happen to be in a pond or something when they're full chorusing, you can damage your ear if you spend too much time there. It's so high pitched and it's so loud. Your ears sometimes ring. I've been out recording and it is pretty loud, but they'll call all the way through March and April. Usually by the time they get to May, they're pretty much done. But they're about the size of your pinky, which is pretty cool. And they can come out when there's still ice in the water and call, which is amazing. Usually you can tell an adult, if you ever see a tiny one, they have what looks like a crisscross on their back. And then the other one that comes out about the same time, so you usually hear these guys a lot of times together, is our chorus frog. And it sounds to me like sometimes I will tell people it sounds like maybe a rain stick or something like that, or running your finger over a comb constantly. But it makes a very distinctive call. And these guys from here, they range from here all the way up to Canada area. Pretty unique animal. Of course, they come out in February and they'll call all the way through May, almost the same frame time as spring peeper. Both of these species like typically fishless ponds. So you're not going to find them the same place. Usually you find bullfrogs and green frogs. They don't do very well with fish in their predation on their eggs. And so you just don't find them in those places. As a matter of fact, where I live in the subdivision, they have a retention pond. And there's a creek behind it, and there's other ponds that are fishless around us. And it's neat to actually, you can hear them calling, and they actually go around the pond. They've learned not to go in the pond because there's fish in this retention pond. And it's kind of unique. I've even seen them walking around the pond, so they've learned not to go near fish. The other smaller ones in here, and you'll notice that these guys are all related. You'll see it says tree frogs and their kin or allies. They're all related to each other, and they're similar in shape and everything. The difference is actually their feet and their toes. And so spring peepers and chorus frogs, they can climb, but not very high. So you find them on grasses and things lower. One of the differences over here, you have a cricket frog, which you usually find more in like rivers and creeks, gravel bars and stuff like that. And their feet are a little bit longer. They don't climb very well. And then of course you have your tree frog, and everybody's probably heard of tree frog before. Which is one of my favorites, though people who live in big buildings or apartment buildings that may not like them because they like to climb up and make themselves echo. But it's a nice, hearty, resident trill. And we only have the gray tree frog in our area, although just so everybody's aware, they come in a lot of colors. And some of them, when they're very young, they might be almost all green, even though they're a gray tree frog. But as they get older, typically they get more gray or brown on them. And sometimes they'll still have green blotches, but we only have typically two kinds of tree frogs. And the ones are called the Cope's gray tree frog, and one is are called the gray tree frog. Now, and the green tree frog, typically you will not find until like the Boot Hills. You'd have to go down to the bottom half of Missouri to you really find them. Now, we have found some of them, we think, calling in Jefferson Barracks and some of the sinkholes. So they are around, but they're not common in our area. And then, of course, the cricket frog sounds like marbles or rocks hitting together. And you notice that the way I put these down on the bars in the bottom, these guys come out later than the other ones I just showed you. So these are really not started until April. And so you notice chorusing wise, some of them start to come out earlier and there's overlap, but some don't come out until some of them are in the middle of the other ones that are finishing up. So you start to get a chorus of different frog species throughout the months, the spring months. But cricket frogs are pretty easy to identify if you hear them, of those two, I think, just not like marbles hitting together. Leopard frog is kind of unique because it is a big frog compared to the other ones. It is related to your bullfrogs, but it is a spring breeder. If you look down here, these guys do come out February, March, and April-ish, whereas like your bullfrogs, you'll see in a minute, they're coming way over here on the other side. But they make we have a leopard frog in here. This is the southern leopard frog, and there's a couple different kinds, but these guys make very unique noises. One of my favorites. You can kind of hear them on top. There is, of course, it's hard to get, really clean recordings, but you can hear the guy making like a laughing noise, and that's very common of a lot of our leopard frogs. There's some that just make that chucking noise, and then there's some like the southern leopard frog that makes that a little bit more of the laughing noise. And then the last two frogs we're going to end up with, these are our big guys, the big guns of the frog world. And so you have your bullfrog, which deserves his name over here on the right, and then you got your green frog, and they're similar in appearance actually many times. The green frog, you can usually tell they usually actually have green a lot of times right on the front of their face, if not all green. A lot of green frogs, I have lots of different pictures, are all green. But one of the things we're looking for, I don't know if you probably can't see in this photo, but they have a fold of skin from their eyeball, typically down the side of their body. Whereas bullfrogs over here on the right, they have a fold of skin from behind their eye and it wraps around their ear. It doesn't go all the way down their body. So sometimes when you find little ones or young, it's hard to tell because they'll almost be looking the same color. But green frogs have that nice lateral line. Green frog, and I love all frogs, but green frogs I think have the worst noise ever. I don't find it very musical or enjoyable to listen to, and they go from like sounding like a banjo, bow, bow, to like a noise. But I'll go ahead and play it here. That's their typical noise. And then the bullfrog is very unique, and you probably have all heard a bullfrog noise. It's got that nice boom, boom, boom noise, a deep bellow. So pretty distinctive, but obviously the noises are completely different, but these are our later frog species. And so if you ever happen to be in a park, you might see them now, but you're not going to hear them typically calling until a lot later in the season. So when you think of all the frog species, all of these guys build upon each other. They all come out at different times and overlap. And so give you a good idea of, if you want to build a chorus, this is kind of what it sounds like. If you notice, there's a leopard frog in there. There's a leopard frog. There's a toad just started, so it's kind of like the seasons go by. You can kind of hear them all start to blend together. And that is a recording, that's a field recording that we've taken from different sites. And so that is what it can sound like, which is, if you think about it, it can get pretty tough. You hear all these different noises and you're like, what is all of those things? So for fun here, I'm going to play a call in here, and then I'll throw a poll out there for you guys and see if you guys can hear it after some of the things we've heard. So real quick here, I'm going to go play this, and then I'll, if I can activate the poll, let's see. Well, first we'll call it. We'll play it. So the question is, how many species of frogs do you hear? So how many different kinds of frogs and or toads do you hear calling? 1, 2, 3. And a lot of when you listen to frog calls is actually hearing if you hear multiple ones, if you hear a certain species. Trincy, how do I get that box to come back?
Press the escape button.
That's all you do. Okay. Oh, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and play this particular poll here. And we'll see if you guys, let's see, here it is. So what do you guys think? How many species? So a lot of times when we hear calls, it can be pretty hard. Sometimes we hear things of sounds bouncing off each other. But that particular one that we're listening to is actually one species and actually one individual calling at one time. And it can sound like multiple ones. And it just takes really good practice to listen to it. And I only know because I recorded it. It's just one species calling. So let's try something different. Whoop. Close your eyes. You didn't see that. All right. So you might have recognized it, but you might not here. I'm going to go ahead and play this noise here. So while it's playing here, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. What do you think it is? All righty, we'll give another second or here for the poll. All righty, it looks like the majority of everybody are saying that it is a cricket frog, and indeed it is a cricket frog. And so if we were to go back and listen to all those different noises, the cricket frog, the way I remember it, is like two marbles hitting together. The tick, 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 tick. And it just takes practice, just like birding or something like that. It just takes some practice to listen and remember the different noises. Oop, let me go to the next slide. Here we go. And that's what it looks like. That's what the species would look like that's making that noise. So the question here would be, and I'm going to go through another poll, how many, once again, different species do you hear? It gets a lot harder when there are multiple species calling. I will go ahead and launch this poll. So close your eyes and listen. Okay. So it looks like everybody, I think, is close to answering here. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll stop that poll. So most of us have either thought there are 3 or 4 species calling. Very good. There are definitely 3 species calling. So if you at least heard 3 species, that's fantastic. You were correct. It just takes practice. Now, for fun, I don't know if anybody can remember of all the ones we've heard, which ones they were. But I'm not going to play a poll for this, but if you want to throw it in the chat, see if you can guess of the ones we've talked about, which ones we're calling, and then I'll show you what they were. I'll give everybody maybe a few seconds here to maybe put something in. I'm going to see here what we got going here. Let's see. Peeper, cricket frog. All right. You guys are fantastic. All right. So why don't we go ahead and let's reveal it. And I cheated in the fact that I made this track, so I know it's there. So there was only 3, and there was an American toad calling, a cricket frog, and a spring peeper calling. So great job. And it is fun. I actually love going out listening. I will admit that if you start listening, it starts to become a habit and addicting. I have trouble, and my wife's probably somewhere else in the house, but I have trouble going on a date when we're walking outside and I hear something and it takes my attention away. All I wanted to go find what's calling. But you get pretty good at it. And a lot of times I can actually pick up something's calling and I can barely hear it just because you listen to so many hours of frog calls. And Tracy, it can probably tell you all the frog calls we've sat and listened to. You get pretty good at it after a while. So I'm going to go ahead and close this again. So let's see. There we go. All righty. So the next portion of tonight, and if we have questions, we'll talk about frog calls, is how can I help with frog and toad conservation? What can I do to help out either the FrogWatch chapter or help in general here around the St. Louis region? So one of the ways you can help, there's a lot of different projects, but we have one that doesn't take a lot of involvement. And one is if you happen to have the use of a smartphone, and you can download a free app called iNaturalist, and some of you might have already known about it. I have 2 projects on there, and all you would have to do is record a photo or an audio or both. And we have projects, and I'll talk about it, that will eventually, it filters them out. And so one of the quickest ways you could ever help us out, and we have FrogWatch training, I'll talk about it, where we train people to monitor a site, and that's coming up in a couple weeks. But one of the easiest ways, if you're at a park, even during the daytime, even not at nighttime, you see a frog and you snap a photo, it'll help us actually get an idea where some of these species are. It puts, some observations on a map for us. So tonight I'm going to spend some time going over iNaturalist. If you've never heard about it before, I'll kind of walk you through how to use it and the power of iNaturalist. And one of the nice things about it is auditory. It's a great way because not only can I go in and look at auditory, I can graph them out if we're not quite sure what species it is. And so we can really definitively answer what you're hearing or not hearing. So the next part is what I call iNaturalist 101. And I've been using iNaturalist app for a long time, or online program. And you can also interact with it through a PC on a computer. And we'll do that tonight just to kind of show you what it looks like. But it works very well on an iPhone or any kind of smartphone or Android. So how do you make an iNaturalist account? It's real simple. What I typically recommend, although you can do it on your telephone, I like to go to a computer, sit down, find the Google iNaturalist, and it'll pop up. And it's real simple. You can either one, you just need an email address. It does have the feature where it'll ask if you want to just use, if you happen to have a Gmail account, auto fill in and everything, and you're good to go. If not, a lot of times I will just go ahead and use an email address and put a password and everything in there. It doesn't take, I think, more than 30 seconds, typically, maybe up to 2 minutes to register an account. It's pretty quick, pretty easy. They don't ask too much information, but you just need an email address. Once you make an account, you do get a page that looks like this, which can be intimidating. Once you open up, you're like, whoa. It does have a ribbon up top, and you can click on all these, and they're pull down menus. But you get what's called, like a lot of programs have, a dashboard. And all of these, this is my account. These are observations that I have made and somebody's talking about it. And the power of iNaturalist is crowdsourcing. Because this is opened up to the world, and there's people around the world who will go on here and actually look at your observation and agree or disagree, make a comment about it. And why that's so powerful. I've actually given a presentation about iNaturalist, and when I put an observation in there, somebody from another country responded and actually agreed with my observation just like instantaneously. And so there is a really neat community in iNaturalist, and you can actually follow people that are really good in their fields, and you can ask them questions. And there's a way to reach out to the different people who have accounts on there and ask them how they can identify them. But the other part that makes iNaturalist really beneficial, besides that it's a smart app, and we'll go through that, is there's some built-in software that does help you initially to help you take your best guess or an educated guess about what it might be. There's some algorithms that'll go through pictures and comparing and hopefully get you closer so you can make a better guess of what it may be. And there's many other features, but those are the ones I was just going to point out tonight. But if you look up here, there's actually like 3 ways to get the same place, but there's always a little button, and I'll do it live in a minute. But how to add an observation, this is exactly what you do. So what is an observation when it comes to iNaturalist? Well, these are the major areas of what it's answering, like who you are. And so you have to have an account to be able to put an observation. You can go on there for free and look at all the observations, but if you want to make an observation, you do have to have an account. And what it's going to ask you is what you saw. And so you can type in anything, but there's some features in there that'll help you get a better identification. It's going to ask you when you saw it. And it's going to ask you where you saw it. So it needs a GPS location. Now you can put observations in without an actual GPS location, but what it's using, if you're using your smartphone or something, obviously, if you enable it, it's going to use your GPS location from your telephone, and as well as the date and time. And so it kind of pulls that info from your phone right in there. If you don't want those features on there, you can go and turn them off. But then the last thing it's going to do is it's pretty much going to ask you evidence of what you saw. And the form that it uses is either a picture or an audio. You can put an observation in with any of those things, but it's considered a lower grade observation because there's no way to verify it or look at it. And then, of course, there's also features of notes you can put in there. What I typically do, and we'll talk about it, when I take a photo, I take multiple photos, of different angles and everything. So when somebody else looks at my observation, they can get a great idea, especially when I do plants, because it's easier. You can do a picture of the leaf on the plant, the bark of the plant, the twig. So somebody else is trying to look at my observations, they can go, oh, that is what it is. There's all these different things I can use for observations to key it out. But typically, if you were to add a photo, this is what happens. It pops in here and it shows up kind of like a card. But then it gives you the ability, which is nice, is it'll go through the pictures of the world that it has in its catalog. And it's going to give you the top 10 choices, what it thinks it is based on the pixels in there. It tries to match it out. And it'll give you some choices. And you can actually go through and you can compare what it thinks it might be to your picture and go back and forth, read about it and see if that's what it might be. And then you can accept it or not. If you were to use your iPhone, which is wonderful, it does have that feature. You can do that. There are some differences between using this on Android and iPhone. I'll try to point some of those out. But this is what it kind of looks like on an Android phone here. These are all my observations. This is what the dashboard kind of looks like. And when you go to hit the add button here, this pops up, and then I can either put in a photo. You can take a photo on the spot. You can also, if you've already taken a photo before, you can actually upload that. And sometimes if I'm in a hurry, I may not even go into the program, and I may just snap photos. And then later on, if I wanted to upload stuff, I may just go back into the app. I'm sitting in my house, and I'll go and I'll click on choose photo. And what that does is, as long as the GPS was enabled, it pulls it in, and all the info from that photo, the date and the time and everything, auto fills itself in. You can also choose a sound, which is wonderful. So if you have different apps on your telephone, or you're using Android, you may be able to pull in from some of those sources, like if you had a memo app or something like that, or you can use its software and you can record a call. And so those are some different ways to put observations in there. But this is typically what it looks like. It also gives you the feature. I'm not going to go through it up here, but if you look at the very top up here, these little icons, it enables you to edit your photo. So like sometimes you may take a photo of a leaf from 10 feet away, but that's not always helpful. And so you can edit it and crop it down to what you want somebody to see as your observation. That way, if there's more than one species in it, you can only put one species in by cropping it down. But once it gets put in there, it looks like this, and you can see you can keep taking photos. You can have lots of different photos of the same observation, which is nice. But the first photo is what it's using to auto-generate some answers. If you click in this little bar, this is exactly what happens over here. It pops down here, and these are all my choices. This is the top choice up here. Typically, this is like the family group it might belong to, and then you can go through and you can click some buttons here and compare. You notice here, this one auto-filled itself in. And I'll talk about it later, but down here where it says location visibility, when I go online to show you guys, you do always have the ability to turn this off, which means you don't have to share with the world. So if you took a picture of something cool in your backyard, you want everybody to know about it, but you still want to record it for yourself, you can turn it off so nobody can see that observation. And there's some other features in there. So there are some safeguards if you needed to use them. But once again, if you have that photo in there, which is great, it has this wonderful feature where you can kind of click on these little arrow buttons, and it pops up, and now I can actually compare. Which you look over here, this is my photo and this is what it thinks it is. And there's a bunch of photos. You can scroll through, you can expand this out and compare and see, nah, this isn't quite it. Then you can go to the next one, you can compare it. You can read about it. So there's lots of different wonderful built-in features to help you identify something. Obviously, there are no features right now for audio. All you can do is put an audio up. There's no features to be able to help you compare it against something else. But typically that's it, and you hit accept, and poof, it pops up there, it syncs, and your observation is up, and the whole world can see it, and they can post on it, and you can go back in and see if anybody agreed with what you thought it was, which is always entertaining and kind of fun. Now, one of the differences, obviously, this is an iPhone, and we wanted to point this out. Obviously, it looks a little bit different looking, but one of the things we noticed as of right now that's really different is you can only record using the app, or the part that's built into the app, which means if you had other things on your phone, on your iPhone to record stuff, it doesn't allow you to pull it in to iNaturalist that way. Now on a PC, if you ever download, you can always put anything up, typically through the PC, if you're on a computer or something like that. But on an iPhone, you don't have those options. So how does this help? And so what happens is if you put a photo up and you don't make it private, what happens is it will actually filter into different projects. And so the two projects that I run is an audio project. My FrogWatch call STL is only set up for audios that are found in the surrounding region. So if you took an audio and you put it up there and it just happens to be from Creve Coeur, it will end up in my project unless you marked it as private. And so it helps for me put observations into the area that I'm interested, the geographical area. Same with pictures. I think mine are from Missouri, but I can obviously zoom in and look at the photos around St. Louis. So if you put any picture around the St. Louis area in Missouri, it'll filter directly into my project. And so this is just a different way that it can help me figure out where all the species are here in the St. Louis region. And these projects actually are helping support some of our goals from a FrogWatch chapter, which we're looking at the populations and how they're doing, and also areas we might want to start looking into if we start to see different patterns. And then also it's feeding into one of our new zoo projects called the Spring Peeper Program, where we're actually specifically looking for where they are not, the presence and absence of spring peepers, chorus frogs, and cricket frogs. And so all these observations help us find these. Now we're using recording devices and many other ways, but obviously we can only be in so many places. And so we may miss stuff. And so this helps us fill in those areas that we can't get to. Now there definitely are some, some do's and don'ts of iNaturalist. And one of those, of course, is take test photos. You can easily just throw a photo up there, and if it's your account, you can delete the photo. You can delete the observation. We usually ask that if you do a test photo for the name, put test photo. That way somebody doesn't try to identify it right away. And so some people jump on there and try to identify it, but if you put test photo, they know that it's just a test photo. And then delete it when you're done. And photograph weeds. A lot of people think about, stuff growing out of a crack in the driveway. That's actually not a bad thing, because there's those plants, they may be invasive, but we want to know where some of those things are. And so that's a good thing to take a photo of. One of the things, there is a feature in there that if you took a photo of something that we know is cultivated, like I know I planted it, to flag it. So we know that it's not necessarily native, that we put it in a certain place in nature. Or if it's around your yard or something like that. So there are some different things you can do in there to help with the data quality. Now, there are definitely some don'ts in iNaturalist, and some we want to point out. Don't photograph your pets or house plants, because we don't need to know about those things. We don't need pets in there. We're looking for wildlife and stuff like that. Don't photograph faces. It's against the law for most places. And obviously, if kids are in there, it's against the law. iNaturalist is pretty good at if they see something like a face, that they will delete that particular observation. Or won't allow it. So just make sure you don't take pictures of faces. Hands don't matter. A matter of fact, a lot of my photos probably have hands in them if I was picking up something. But it's faces that they're worried about. And don't upload other people's photos. Like if you try to get a photo of a bee, but you couldn't quite do it, but you knew it was a bumblebee, don't go on the internet and download some photo and put it up there, because it breaks copyright laws. And so just only put your own photos up there. So those are the things to remember. And what I like to do here real quick, before we jump into questions and answers, is I was going to show you what iNaturalist looks like. So give me 1 second here, and let's see. I am going to jump to a different screen. Just got to find it. Give me a second. I think this is it. Let's see. And there it is. Okay. All righty. So hopefully everybody can now see iNaturalist, and I'm going to do this one more time. Yep, there we go. All righty. So this is what it would look like when you open it up, and you can see all the accounts in here. And so I'm just going to walk through what it'll be like to open an observation, just so you're familiar with some of the different aspects of it. So real quick, I'm going to add an observation, and this is what it'd be like on your computer, which you could do as well. If you happen to sync your photos like I do. Another way that I work this is I might have Google Photos. If I download my Google Photos to my desktop, it's going to have the GPS coordinates, everything, so I can always upload those. And here's an example actually from my Google Photos. So I throw it in there, and what you notice right away is it auto-filled. So it put in the date and the time and the location, which is a good thing. It already put it in there. I don't have to worry about it. And I'll show you what to do if you can't do that. But there's lots of things you can do, but I want to know what it is. And so I'm going to see to start with. Whoop. Let's see what the suggestions is. So already the top one says it's American water frog. Well, that's not very helpful. We all know it's a frog if you get really close to the photo. And so it does tell me the genus that it's in, and that is correct actually. And so right now it's telling me that it's most likely a plains leopard frog or a pecker frog or a southern leopard frog. So I could always view it and take a look and see if that's what I think it is. So you could go over here and take a look. This is what it's thinking it might be, and that these are common at this time. And so you could say, well, maybe that is what it is. So there's a couple different things we could always look at. And you could look at both of these. It's very similar. There's a couple of ways you can tell the difference, and we could look at it a little bit longer. What I wanted to show you is, let's say I don't like this location. Somehow it's wrong. One of the things you can do is click on here, and you notice you get this view. And so it says it was taken here. But what I can do is I can move it around. So I could actually pick a different place, and that's where it'll end up being. But the other part I wanted to point out here is privacy. Right now it says it's open, which means the whole world could see this if I were to post it. But you can hit obscure, which is a nice way. And what it does is it takes this GPS and it goes, it's almost like the size of a city. So somebody may know that it's from the St. Louis region, but they don't know where. Or I could always hit private, and then nobody can see it. So there's lots of different features built in that you can, hopefully, if you needed to use those, you can use some of those different features. Obviously down here, you could put it as cultivated if I don't know, you grew bullfrogs in your yard or something like that. You can put it down here. Here's the same feature here if you want to make it private. You could add it to a project if you wanted to. So there's a couple different things you could do. You could put different tags on it so you could find it later. There's all types of things you could do. So I'm going to go ahead and at least in there, but what I am going to do is jump back here, and I wanted to show you. So how many observations are there in the world if you've never seen it? Let's hit explore. So this gives you an idea. This map, there you go. There are a lot of observations. And so just take a look here. I'm going to just type in, let's put Forest Park. Forest Park. Whoop, that's not very helpful. Here we go. Now let's put St. Louis. St. Louis. Look at St. Louis. St. Louis, Missouri. We'll zoom in there, and you can get an idea of how many observations there are. All these are different color coded, and so this is which is kind of neat. So you can see all these different colors. This is the city right here, and this are the county. But if you were to look at here, blue obviously are birds. So it's just a great way to see how many observations people have already put in iNaturalist. If we were to take a look at frog observations, obviously we can filter by frogs. So we could come in here and we could just hit frogs, and we now can see all the frog observations of just this area. And so you can see how many have been put in here. So lots of different uses for it, kind of a neat program. I'm going to go ahead and close this out here. And if anybody, whoop, wrong button. Let's see here. Escape, there we go. I am going to go ahead and turn this off here. And if we'll jump right back into where we were. There we go. Oop, down here. There we go. All righty. So what I wanted to end with, obviously, if you want to become a volunteer for FrogWatch, and those are different ways you can participate. Another way is to come to one of our what we call FrogWatch volunteer training sessions. And these, what's different is we still go through some of the frogs and toads. We go a little bit more in depth, but we also go into how to monitor a site. And we have sites that our chapter is interested in, but you can also learn how to monitor, register and monitor your own site. So if you are interested to go, even more committed, or somebody else that might be, we do have that training coming up on Saturday, Saturday's a wrong word. No, it's a Thursday, March 24th.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Your screen is gray right now.
Uh-oh. Thank you. Give me 1 second. Okay, now you can see my screen. Ignore the word Saturday here. Sorry, that's a typo. It should have been Thursday. So it's coming up again next week, in 2 weeks on Thursday. But if you want to become a volunteer, you would just have to go the same place you register for this and register for that particular training. And it's a little bit longer. It goes from 6:30 to 8:30. And you learn some different things about how to monitor and some different information that you need to collect. The URL is down here if you were interested in it, although it's pretty easy to find, same place you went before. Another good resource that's out there if you're interested, and it's pretty easy, it is our St. Louis chapter website. So if you were to just type in, all you have to remember is frogwatchstl.com. If you Google that, it's usually the first hit that comes up, and that's our website. And there's a lot of good resources, and there's resources pardon me, for FrogWatch, if you become a volunteer, what I talked about tonight. And this is where we are going to post this particular video. So if you want to watch it again, it's pretty easy to find. There's also good resources to listen to frog calls again. And so if you heard some calls tonight, you can always go here and listen again over and over again. If you want to get really good at it, you can practice some of those frog calls. So there's really good resources on this particular website here. So that is it for tonight. And so we're going to open it up for questions here. So if you have any, go ahead and throw anything you'd like to ask about what we talked about tonight into the question and answer, and we will, or chat, and we will try to answer them. All righty, I'm gonna take a peek in here, but it looks like so far no questions. All righty, I'll look in the chat real quick.
It looks like we have a question in the chat.
Okay.
So one question is, how can you tell a wood frog call versus a leopard frog call? How can you tell them apart?
Sure. So a wood frog, one of the nice things, they come out earlier. And so our wood frogs sound like, to me, ducks quacking. So the leopard frog species you're going to find here, which would be the plains leopard frog or the southern leopard frog. Both of those come out typically almost maybe 2.5 weeks later, but they're going to sound, the plains leopard frog sounds like a chuck, where they make that noise. And then the leopard frog kind of makes that noise, but then it makes the laughing noise, if that's helpful or not. And so they make that. And so those are some of the differences between the three frog calls. So one's going to come out and probably done already. The wood frog comes out almost the middle of February every year. So I think they've already done, they're done. And not only did they come out and call, they bred, laid eggs, and done. They're really fast, which is a bummer to me because I've been trying to get out and record them. And then the plains leopard frog, which overlaps in our city area, it is sometimes hard to tell them apart a little bit in the beginning of the season. Visually, there are some things you can easily tell them apart if you got close enough. And one of the bigger ones is, I've mentioned the word lateral line. It's that fold of skin that goes from their eye down their body. The plains leopard frog, if you were ever get a good photo or got close enough, there's a break So if you follow it down and there's a break in the back, that's very distinctive of a plains leopard frog. Typically a southern leopard frog, that lateral line goes all the way down without any breaks. And there's some other ones, but that's the one that's probably the easiest to see. Hopefully that answered your question. If you ever hear one you're not sure and you got a recording of one, I'm more than happy to listen to it and give you my opinion. Let's see here. All righty.
There's another question in the chat. The question says, is a frog a good pet? And if so, what breed is good for beginners?
Good question. I love frogs, but I don't think they make the greatest pets. This is my particular opinion. They take, especially ones that are aquatic, because they take good filtration, and they take a good setup with a lot of humidity. So I don't think they make the easiest of pets. There are many in the world out there. I know one of the most common ones was the African clawed frog. But once again, it's going to take really good filtration system to keep the water clean. And you do run the risk. We do have, I don't think they're alive anymore, but people used to dump African clawed frogs out into the wild. And so there's that problem of moving diseases and stuff like that. And it's not that I don't love frogs in captivity. I probably love to have some. I think the easiest way to have frogs, if you love them, if you can afford one and you don't mind the upkeep and everything, a little tiny pond in the backyard, or a barrel, like a little water garden-y thing. A lot of times you'll end up with a toad or a tree frog in them, and naturally they'll come and go. But that's my take on it. I used to install water gardens, and it's it is hard to upkeep a water garden, but it is probably an easier way to get at least native frogs. Some of the other frog species I do think are a little harder, and even the ones that are, trying to think, it's a frog from Papua New Guinea that's really popular in the pet trade. I still think it's harder to keep the humidity up. So that's my take, but good question. I think reptiles sometimes are a little easier in captivity than a frog.
Another question is, do you have any tricks for getting close enough to take a picture of the frog?
So the tricks that I use, number one, if you're able to at nighttime, is if you can use a very bright light, like a deer in a headlight. A lot of them will freeze, and it gives you not a huge amount of time, but a certain amount of time to get a photo of them. And so that's one of the things why you see a lot of herpers at night with headlamps. It able to get them a little closer, and they'll freeze for a minute. And when I mean a minute, maybe 30 seconds to get a photo. And sometimes it just takes a lot of practice, 1,000 times taking photos. One of the other times that my wife and I photograph a lot of frogs together, that works really good. You wait till the fall. And so in the fall, as the temperature drops, a lot of the frogs will be out, especially the bigger ones, are out of the water. And you have a very good chance, evening into it's a little darker, where it's so cold they don't move very fast, which is to me a wonderful thing. And so you have a little bit longer to photograph before they hop away or something like that. Another method that works for me, for smaller frogs, if you can catch one and keep your hand over top of it on the ground and just kind of like cup your hand. It works really good if they're in dark for a little bit. They just don't move. And if you remove your hand, you have the camera ready, or have somebody else get the camera ready, and then move your hand away. And sometimes you can get a nice crisp photo. So hopefully those methods might be helpful to you. And sometimes it's just good luck.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions. We have one question that says, would a rain garden be possibly a better, easier, natural environment that may attract frogs and toads?
The answer would be yes. Rain gardens are great. You'll only attract certain kinds and certain times of the year, and that may be great for what purpose you may want them to have them. But yes, rain gardens are a great way. A lot of times most likely you get toads in a rain garden, which is fantastic. You may, depending where you live and what's nearby, you may have some of the smaller frog species coming through, especially in the springtime. or in the end of the year in the fall. The only things you'll never get typically in a rain garden, unless you had a lot of water all the time, would be like the bigger ones. So like your bullfrogs and stuff like that. But a rain garden is a fantastic way to get stuff. Now, with that being said, it always depends on what's nearby. You know, if you're very far away from another water source, it may be too far for some of the frogs to travel. But frogs move quite a bit, and which is a neat thing to know. It's not guaranteed, but when I did used to install water gardens, we used to tell people, and it seemed about right. I mean, if they were in half a mile of some pond or something, usually been 2 to 3 years, somebody came across and found one, and they hear somebody calling, somebody found some water. So to answer your question, I think it's a great thing to put it in your backyard around your house.
Another question we have is, if the wood frog is done calling for the year, what do they do until next year?
That's a great question for a lot of them. So obviously they're going to keep eating, and they're just a lot harder to find. And wood frogs typically are in the water. And so you can catch them with a net if you just knew where they were to look at them. But most of them are just going to stay somewhat active. As it gets colder, they just go into a torpor and eventually hibernate. And so some of them, for example, other frog species might go in their leaf litter, like spring peepers. There's like tons of them, like handfuls of them. And then you're like, where'd they all go? They just happen to go in a leaf litter, because we know they're still alive, and they're not sleeping during this summertime. But most of them, they do eat. They come in at nighttime. But so with the wood frog, they're just not as active, loud, at least breeding noises. So you don't notice them as much, but they're definitely there in the ponds wherever they bred. Good question.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions.
I wanted to say thank you for the comment about making frog noises. I appreciate it. I've spent many years trying to make frog noises. So appreciate the comment. I wanted to say thanks everybody for coming tonight, and I hope you found it informative and hopefully worthwhile. And if you have other questions about frogs and toads, please feel free to reach out at any time. And I'm easy to get a hold of, at least email wise, at the zoo. It's Dawson, DAWSON at sdlzoo.org. And we're more than happy, Trinity and I, to try to answer any of your frog and toad questions. And hopefully we'll see some people, maybe some observations you might put out there in iNaturalist. And if not, have some fun, and hopefully you'll enjoy some of the frogs and toads you hear, and then maybe now you'll know what some of those species may be. So everybody have a great night, and we will get this posted, and we'll throw it on our Facebook page once it's up and posted. All right, everybody have a great night.